Hi everyone. I'm Emma Underhill, the Director of Up Projects, and I'm a white woman with shoulder-length blonde hair and blue glasses. And I'm really pleased to welcome you to the hall this evening for a very special screening of excerpts of films by Jasleen Kaur that are currently presented in Touchstones Rochdale as part of her recent commission, Gut Feelings Meri Jaan. The screening will then be followed by a conversation between Jasleen and some of her collaborators, moderated by Louisa Uliet from the Photographers Gallery, with a question and answer section at the end. So to give you a bit of a background about the commission, Up Projects first started working with Jasleen to create this multifaceted project in 2017, working in partnership with Touchstones in Rochdale. Our invitation to Jasleen was to create an artwork that responded to the very specific context of Rochdale and was developed through a participatory process with community members. The project took various twists and turns as it evolved over time. And then, of course, in 2020, the COVID pandemic happened and face-to-face engagement or participatory processes became impossible. Yet somehow, the experience of being distanced and locked down also enabled a new level of intimacy and engagement through the very same online format that we're experiencing now. Zoom became the communal meeting room where a group of women and those who identify as gender non-conforming from Rochdale's Pakistani, Bengali and Punjabi communities were brought together by Jasleen to begin a rich, emotive dialogue which underpins her innately collaborative work. So Jasleen will be discussing her engagement processes later in the event, as well as talking more about the work itself. But I'd just like to acknowledge how grateful I and the team at Up Projects are to have had the opportunity to work with Jasleen, her group of collaborators and the team at Touchstones, and to support the creation of this amazing work. As a public art organisation, we take pride in enabling public works that are relevant and responsive to the context in which they're situated. And Gut Feelings Meri Jaan is a fantastic example of an artwork that has developed out of a genuine and inclusive engagement process. Gut Feelings Meri Jaan is presented at Touchstones Rochdale at the moment, alongside a new film by Helen Kamak, commissioned by Touchstones and Film and Video Umbrella. Kamak's work, Concrete Feathers and Porcelain Tacks, that brought together residents and community groups of Rochdale to explore notions of community, is also presented at the Photographers Gallery in London. So I'm really pleased that we've had the opportunity to develop this event in partnership with the Photographers Gallery. And I'm now delighted to hand over to Louisa Uliet, who'll be moderating the discussion this evening. Over to you, Louisa.
Thank you, Emma. As Emma said, my name is Louisa Uliet, and I'm curator of talks and events at the Photographers Gallery. I'm honored to be here with Jasleen Kaur on her new to present her new work, Gut Feelings Meri Jaan. Her film looks at ongoing legacies Rochdale residents face as a post-industrial town and how cultural memory exists and is shared, concerns that connect Jasleen's film with the work of British artist Helen Kamak in Concrete Feathers and Porcelain Tacks. Currently on view at the Photographers Gallery, Helen's film responds to the hardness of the industrial landscape, the experiences of those there now, and their connection to the past. Through conversations, we are brought into the lives of people like Sultan, former mayor of Rochdale and the town's first Asian Muslim mayor, and members of the Ukrainian Women's Choir, as well as local activists and community workers. Using pieces and artifacts from Touchstones, the people featured in the film reflect and engage with the objects as they link their stories of ownership, collectivity, migration, labor, familial legacy, and personal circumstance to the collection. This film is about how these stories endure and the ideas that these objects are living and imbued with human experience and existence. Just to mention again, in terms of format for this event, we will begin with a screening of films by Jasleen Kaur. Following that, she will give a brief presentation, after which we'll have a discussion and meet some of her collaborators featured in the film. There will also be time at the end for questions and contributions from you. These can be submitted via Slido, accessible in the link provided here, or by raising your hand using the Zoom function available. Thank you again for joining us, and please click through the link provided. We encourage you to stay logged into the hall where we will be reconvening in roughly 30 minutes. Thank you.
On the one hand, I feel like I'm losing my culture, my heritage, because I feel like I've become anglicised in lots of ways, you know? Like we need to hang on to it. And I think now I'm clinging on to it, but for a long time, I suppose I wanted to fit in. But now, for what I've got, now that I've got my own children, I feel really sad because I feel like they don't have what we had. My parents told us stories, and I feel like at the moment I haven't got the patience to tell my kids those stories. And like the cost of them to take them abroad, just for me and my two kids to go to Bangladesh, the airfare is going to cost about £4,000. I can't show them that culture. I can't show them their heritage. Even though Rochdale is home, another part of me feels like it's never going to be home. But when we were in Bangladesh, they'd make fun of us because we were from England. So I've got this yearning to go back there, but then I kind of feel like I'm not really wanted there either. So where do we fit in?
Are we not creating our own culture, separating ourselves from old culture? Because our culture is ever expanding and ever evolving. There are always ways, there's always other stories for us to follow, there's always new culture.
For me, it evoked a memory because I grew up in the 80s with the National Front marching, and because being really fearful for our lives, you know, things like our windows being put through.
Your generation had the National Front, mine had the EDL. Like I remember people, all the boys getting together to go and fight the EDL, and it's not stopped. My generation's definitely seen it.
I remember my dad telling me stories. He came on his own to this country, and he remembers living with a couple of men that became friends with whom became our auntie and uncle. They would put a shilling in a pot every week to make roti and dal. They had single beds in the bedroom, and they shared depending on who did the night and day shift. I remember being told they didn't know how to read or write or speak English, so one of them did, and they would all go to that house to fill the forms.
One particular memory of mine I remember. My father never took a day off work. He was a spinner. He did night shifts for 36 years without time off. But I have a particular memory where Dad would come home, and in the hallway Mum would have his suitcase packed. Dad would walk in with his little tiffin, put one bag down and pick up the other, and he'd get on a coach and travel for 4 days and somehow get to Pakistan.
So I'm told before I was born, my dad, while he was out working in the cotton factories, he bought Mum a knitting machine, and she'd used to knit jumpers. She'd knit jumpers and they would sell them to other folk in the community because it was so cold, bitterly cold, and they used to trade stuff between each other. So if someone had been taken to Pakistan or Bangladesh, they'd trade jumpers or prayer mats, which were really scarce at times. I remember the sewing machine, the smell of the oil, and my mum, she used to sew pieces from my dad's friend Malik's factory. She did it to earn for the family. You know, there was a lot of us.
Back then, it was just my nana and 5 kids, living in a brand new country like, what am I doing? So I've really sad stories of her trying to go see my dying granddad. Then having to walk in sandals in the snow because she had no money for transport. And just her, and my granddad just passing away, and just her trying to figure out the whole community and this whole world. She was in a white neighbourhood at the time, but she had a couple of friends, one from Kenya, one from Pakistan. So that's like my education. My narratives and story of her trying to evolve from the life she knew to this, having to fight in and fit for her rights as a single mother in the 70s. But it really warms my heart to know there was such a good community and she was so fortunate to have lived where she lived.
My mum would always give me almonds for my brain. When I was younger, a lady on the street would soak almonds for me till you could slip the skins off. And I walked to hers in the morning to go and eat them. And that's healing, to know that there's a community that cares that much about you.
My healing is prayer. That's the biggest healer for me. 5 times a day, that's what I do. I went through a period in my life where I was utterly helpless, and I remember just sitting there on a prayer mat. It was a fragile prayer. I just sat there and I cried for hours on end, and I was in that position for God knows how long, just crying and asking God to help me. And I think that was my turning point. And ever since then, that's what's made me so strong. So whenever I'm feeling stressed or feeling like there's something I can't deal with, I just turn to God. That's my biggest healer.
My nephew, he's really religious. He always said to me, Auntie Bushra, you need to pray to Allah. You need to pray. I said, well, I meditate and that's the way of praying. I meditate to Allah. When I hear the namaz, it's very spiritual for me, even though I don't read namaz, but just the sound of it. There was one particular time when I was in Morocco in the mountains. I heard the namaz echo from one end of the valley right through to the other side, and I just cried. Actual tears came. It was so beautiful.
Cooking for me is a kind of ritual. Cooking with my partner when we lived together for a short time last year. I'd come back and we'd go into the kitchen, and she has a chronic illness. So a lot of time she's in pain. I throw in a lot of haldi because I know it's good for anti-inflammatory.
The Hakim deals with any issues in your body, issues with the stomach and the intestines. They're usually to do with mental health, anxiety, trauma. I've got an auntie in London who's a homeopathic doctor, so my interest in it came from her. I was reading up on these medications to deal with suppressed anxiety. There's a combination of aconite, ignatia and gelsemium that I put together for my daughter, and she feels a lot calmer. It works from within, sometimes straight away, other times it takes a few weeks or months to work. And if it doesn't, then you know you've not got the right combination for you, so you switch to something else.
I want them to know our origins. I want them to know where we come from, where our humble beginnings are. I'm studying neuroscience and how the mind works, and all my reading took me to nature. One of the instructions was to touch nature, literally be on the ground. So I started walking. I woke up at 5 o'clock and I'm fucking gonna do it, is what I decided. I went outside. I had my slippers. I live in front of a beautiful park. So I took off my slippers and placed them underneath my arm, and I walked. And I was shitting it because I didn't want to feel cold. But when my bare soles touched the ground, I kid you not, the almighty energy, I felt rejuvenated and revitalized. I can't tell you, I actually wept. I was walking and crying because the earth, everywhere I put my sole, it embraced me. It was so warm, almost orgasmic. I felt revived and rejuvenated. So I often do it now, and I don't care how people see me. I look at a tree and say to the tree, I'm inhaling what you're exhaling, and you're exhaling what I'm inhaling. Without you, I don't exist, and without me, you don't exist. So we are nature together. Our prophet used to go to Mount Hira, and it says in the ground that the mountains are the nails of this earth. So Allah has laid down the ground and earth, and the mountains are the nails that are holding it all in place.
My granddad goes out hiking with his Asian friends because he's quite outdoorsy, and I've been quite outdoorsy. I used to play football a lot, I even played for a team, and I guess that was my relationship to land. Playing out outside of my grandparents between the 2 rows of houses, that little strip of land, it meant so much to us because we turned it into a football pitch, we turned it into a cricket pitch, and we'd really make use of it. And I was thinking about how I asked my mum to bring me mud from Pakistan, and I was just thinking to myself, why did it have to be from there? When I was looking at when you saw film negatives in different soils and stuff, like how important pH is, and I was just thinking how that land over there, that soil is just richer.
But really, where are you from? Your accent doesn't sound like it. How is my tongue supposed to move? How does my mother's tongue move? How does my mother's mother's tongue move? How does my mother's 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 tongue move?
I don't know. I actually can't find the words. I feel lost all of a sudden. I thought I knew who I was. I walk around like 10 men, although I don't have a pair of balls. But this, diving into my history, is making me feel weak somehow. I'm actually intrigued by the way my body is reacting and the emotions it triggers. I'm sad to never have mourned the tragedies and sufferings of our parents, our forefathers, our foremothers. Jasleen Meri Jaan, these are uncharted territories for us, much to learn, mourn and come to terms with.
Citizens Without a Country, January 1987. The old man had arrived from Kenya only a week ago. His daughter had phoned to ask if I would meet him. He had a problem. Over a cup of coffee, he told me his story. He had been taken by his parents from his birthplace, Jalandhar in India, to Kenya when he was a boy. He had spent most of his life in Kenya. His passport described him as a contractor. He produced 4 or 5 passports. The earliest, issued in 1946, gave his nationality as British subject, citizen of the UK and colonies. His present Kenya passport shows that he had been given permission to stay in Britain for 6 months. He proudly produced an old faded paper to show that during the Second World War he had enlisted in Kenya and had served as a soldier for almost the duration of the war. He had fought against the Italians in Abenicia. When the crisis about British nationals arose in independent Kenya in the early 1960s, Asians were given 2 years to decide whether to keep British citizenship or to take Kenyan citizenship. Having no friends in Britain and being uncertain about finding work, he had decided to give up his Britain citizenship and became a citizen of Kenya. By doing this, he would at least be able to work and support his young family. His wife and children held British passports. The years went by. His children grew up and he had now retired. His health was not good because of his heart trouble. One daughter had married an Asian in Britain and was now settled here. He wanted to know if he could now give up his Kenya citizenship and resume his British citizenship. He and his wife wished to settle here to be near his daughter in their old age. In mid-October, when the scene at Heathrow about the visa controls was receiving intensive but insensitive coverage in the national press and on television, she phoned me about 9 o'clock one night. She was deeply distressed. All their windows had been broken. The old car that her husband had recently bought from a friend had been set on fire and burned out. The local authority had told them that they would be moved into a hotel that same night. It was not safe for them to remain in their house. Some weeks later, settled in another council house, she phoned me again. The morning after their move into a hotel, they had returned to their home. The house had been ransacked during the night, and what personal belongings they had been able to take with them in their hurried move had been stolen. She could not understand how people could behave like this. In the House of Lords on the 5th of November, in the debate on visa controls, the Bishop of Manchester said that the changes were a signal, and if those signals indicate that some British people in this country are undesirable, that simply encourages the latent racism in our society. He added that racial harassment and attacks were not unconnected with immigration procedures. January 1987 had brought no decision about her husband from the Home Office. The parents of both husband and wife in Pakistan want them to go for a holiday. They want to see the baby. The couple dare not go until the husband's position is finally settled. He may not be readmitted to Britain. The pressure on this family seemed endless, especially the silence from the Home Office. It is not unknown for people in this position to decide to leave Britain out of sheer desperation. Is this what the Home Office want? Another daughter, about 28, had come with her father from Africa and had been sitting listening. Now suddenly she interrupted our conversation. My father has given almost all his life in the service of Britain. Why should he not be able to live here? I consider Britain to be one of the worst countries in the world for racism. In the United States, black people, though discriminated against, are certainly regarded as United States citizens. We Asians left in Kenya had no country now. You white people have a country to which you belong. The Asians in Kenya feel isolated. They belong to no country, not Kenya, nor India or Pakistan. Although I have British nationality and hold a British passport, I am not wanted here. I believe there will be great trouble in Britain if this is not changed. When I left, her father insisted on carrying my briefcase. He walked with me some distance along the road. He then stopped and thanked me. We shook hands and he returned the way he had come.
I'm lost for words, really.
Yeah. Rochdale Observer, 18th of January 1947. Polish women and the mills. The cotton industry in Rochdale, which is already suffering from a serious shortage of labour, particularly the ring spinning section, is hoping to recruit a number of volunteer workers as the result of the visit paid to the Era Mill on Tuesday last by a party of about 30 Polish women.
Housing foreign workers. Suggestion to use Mount site for hostels.
Maltese girls become cotton operatives.
August 2006. Expanding firm cast its net across globe. Many Rochdale firms benefited from an influx of workers from overseas. Few more so than the Alderglen Manufacturing Company. The firm, which manufactured nylon garments, had its head office in London and first moved into Rochdale in 1961, taking over Spotland Bridge Mills. In its early days, there were up to 25 Italian working there, but towards the end of 1965, Managing Director Sidney Rubin went on a recruiting campaign in Malta. He explained, "We cannot get the labour we want here, so I decided to see what I could get in Malta, where there is a high unemployment rate. I went on commercial television and radio and advertised in the local papers. One problem he faced were the strong family ties amongst the Maltese people, with families unwilling to allow their daughters to go abroad to work. However, he hoped to overcome that by finding the women accommodation in Catholic homes in Rochdale."
Polish women at Rochdale Mill, attracting foreign labour to cotton industry. A party of about 30 Polish women, dependents of members of the Polish Armed Forces from the War Office camp in Doddington, near Nantwich, on Tuesday visited the Era Mill, Rochdale.
December the 8th, 1956. Terror-stricken Hungary is now behind them. The first of the 50 Hungarian refugees to reach Rochdale leave the motor coaches in Cheetham Street late on Tuesday evening. With them in the centre is Captain Smith of the Salvation Army with his wife. Another 50 refugees are expected at any time.
The National Front candidate in Rochdale and his supporters distributed and displayed literature which contained information about immigrants and immigration, and stated the front policy towards immigrants. Posters such as "Send Them Back," National Front favours registration of all coloured immigrants were displayed. The National Front propaganda was counteracted by the distribution of a number of leaflets by the International Socialites and Rochdale and Anti-Racialists Committee, which exposed the fascist policy. One leaflet read, "Smash fascism, stop the National Front now."
Employers justify the segregation of Pakistanis into different departments and sections by referring to language difficulties. Segregation, they claim, makes possible efficient utilisation of labour.
There was a sense of community amongst the Pakistanis. Mutual aid and physical and emotional support in times of need seemed to be part of the way of life in the area. Pakistani women usually kept an eye on each other's children, went shopping together, and borrowed small quantities of food from each other when stocks ran out. Dishes of food were exchanged if something special was cooked. Similarly, men helped each other with exchange of work and tools. Cars could be borrowed in time of need, such as illness or bereavement, and so on. Lifts to and from work were quite common, although in some cases a nominal contribution was made to cover the cost of petrol.
It appears that Pakistan's participation in the observer elections, although marginally greater than that of the people, was lower than might be expected from the previous election. The explanation was this, as mentioned above, in that many Pakistanis may have been deterred from going into the polls by the rather intimidating prospects of being challenged by polling agents and the National Front candidates.
I work at night shift for several reasons, such as working together, no management and white people present, so no communication problem. All of us work at night. So for social reasons, I will be left alone. And on top of all this, I get 20% more money, he added. If you work at day, it seems very long. If you work at night, it passes quickly. We were temporarily so to earn more money in our aim and to get back as soon as possible. जिगर का टुकड़ा इधर नीचे से भी करो मैं फिर ना कराऊं इधर ना टुकड़ा मैं इधर भी काट इसको करना है
Hi everyone, we're going to make a start. So we'll just wait a few moments as people maybe shut off their YouTube. Great. Well, welcome back everyone. We hope you enjoyed that. I think there may have been some who started streaming the film a little bit later, but the link will be active after the event tonight, so you will be able to access it after then, and you can watch it at your leisure. Anyway, we just wanted to move on to the next part of tonight's evening. So I'm very pleased to finally introduce the artist Jasleen Kaur. Jasleen?
Hi. I'm really sorry that the link wasn't working for a few of you. I hope you can tune in, later on. Maybe, so I'm gonna give a little bit of context to what you've just seen, and then we've got Nazreen and Alina and Rahela and Bushra with us here tonight, and then sadly Riz and Shakra couldn't be here, so we're going to kind of have a bit of a group chat and then leave a bit of time for questions. As I was watching, the thing that I was like realizing is that some context has to be given, that in the exhibition all of these films are installed in various spaces with like massage chairs and sofa covered in like grass fabric, and I guess like everything's playing at the same time. And you're seeing just bits of film. So for example, the archive film is like over an hour long, where the Nazreen Bushra and Shakra are reading parts of the ethnic minorities section of an archive of the archive held at Touchstones, and it's printed on rice paper, and that's what they're eating and then kind of tossing to the floor. So it's, I don't know, Nazreen and Bushra can tell you about it, but I guess it was quite exhausting at the same time. But so a little bit of context about the commission. It's commissioned by Up Projects. Obviously, I was invited by them and partnered by Touchstones to work in some way in Rochdale. And this has been like, as Emma pointed to, like it's been, I don't know, 4 years or so of work, but really it felt like the work began when the group came together, that was facilitated by Lisa and Brian, who work at Touchstones. And that coincided with the beginning of the pandemic and of lockdown. So we ended up meeting over Zoom, and we were meeting like fortnightly, and we'd go like way over the time that we were meant to every single time. And there was something, although there was like a lot that couldn't happen, like we couldn't be in the archive together at Touchstones, so it required like, you know, gathering things digitally. I felt like that something else was facilitated in that space of, or like just the ease of us logging on and being together in that time. So I was kind of inviting everyone to, I guess I was inviting us to think about belonging through going to look for ourselves in the archive. And I guess from the little snippets that you heard, we were thinking about like what stories are told about us and what stories do we want to tell, like who's speaking for whom in the archive, and how the archive is like always this like legitimate, authenticated bit of history. It's like literally the thing that is going to be the reference point in the future, and how it has the power to like form this collective memory, and it preserves that, I guess, but is also like inherently colonial, this thing that is documenting people. And so then we were like turning our attention to like where else are our archives, and thinking about like messy, illegitimate body archives and like the secret archives, right? Like it's worth noting that so much of what has been shared amongst us is not visible in the project. So as I said, we were meeting on Zoom, and from these months of conversations around like our relationship to land, our inheritance, looking at the archive, but also like I was bringing in texts that I was reading or bits of podcasts that I was listening to, and they would facilitate these conversations. And in those like narratives around trauma, we were also thinking about the possibility of intergenerational healing. And then the films, I guess, which were all shot by Alina, I should mention, they were really deliberately happening outside of the gallery. Like they felt like staged interventions, or not less staged, more like kind of rituals in a way. And I was interested in, I guess, like trying to create or complicate the images that you may be faced with in the archive, trying to create new images, but also I felt quite like mischievous and like I wanted to like meddle or like make images that were less easy to read maybe. And definitely thinking about, oh, I've got all these books scattered around me, definitely thinking about like Tina Camp's Listening to Images. So yeah, what you just saw there was some of the films that are in the exhibition, some bits of them where we're reading and eating the archive. Obviously that like eating of historic documents is quite a subversive act, but thinking about like indigestibility as well and about processing this material differently. We were reading about like the gut and how trauma lives in the gut, and it changes the microbiome in your gut. So again, like just bringing it back to the body. Walking in this like typically beautiful Lancashire landscape, or not walking, we weren't going anywhere. Speaking to the landscape, thinking about who's visible and invisible in those landscapes. During our conversations, the farmer protests were going on in India, and we spent a whole evening speaking about that, like because we're all connected to the land somehow ancestrally. And then washing the statue of John Bright, an industrialist, who stands opposite the gallery, Touchstones, and bits of buildings and body, all of which is like linked with the Industrial Revolution and empire. Yeah, maybe I'll shut up there. We were washing it with yogurt. I didn't mention that. Yeah, we're washing it with Pakiza dye. The Pakiza factory is based in Rochdale, which was like a bit of a dream collaboration that didn't quite come into fruition. But anyway, that's another project. I hope that gives some context, and yeah, maybe Louisa, we can invite you back to like draw out some more threads. I also didn't, I'm so sorry, it's like end of the day, I didn't allow everyone to introduce themselves. I didn't even introduce myself.
I'll introduce you, but maybe we can briefly do that now, actually, because my first question does bring everyone else in. But thanks for sharing your work, Jasleen. I don't know if Rahila, I see Bushra there.
Hi.
Hi, and I actually don't think we had a chance to meet earlier, so good to meet you now. Nazreen, hello. Alina, Rahila, I think, yeah, that's everyone who's with us today. And sorry for the others who weren't able to join us this evening. I just wanted to start the question off with Jasleen, but hopefully bring in the others. So as Emma mentioned, you were originally commissioned to do this in 2017 after a proposal you submitted to UP Projects. Can you talk us through the different changes it underwent since then and the making of this work? So for example, how you came together with Rahila Khan, Alina Akbar, Bushra Saltera, and Nazreen Akhtar. Maybe you can jump into where necessary or where it feels relevant, and maybe you can start to speak to that idea of engaging people.
Yeah, gosh, it's such like a long period of time. Like in that time, I also had a child and had like went on maternity leave, whatever that means, and then the pandemic, like just like huge momentous things. But I think I was always interested in and had started looking at the archives, because Touchstones has like 3 archives that it looks after. So the local studies library, which is where this material that you were listening to is held, is the like, you know, it's public facing, it's accessible to people who come into the gallery. But then there's like the archive of objects, which is less accessible, and the contemporary art archive. So I think the archive was always an inroad. And actually, Bushra, I don't know if you want to say, you were in my like interview, right? Like I was invited to put together a proposal and pitch it, and Bushra, you were there.
Yeah, I was participating in the panel of choosing the chosen artist. Yes, and I did choose Jasleen. I loved her work. I just fell in love with her when I met her. So I thought, yeah, definitely.
So I guess I mentioned earlier that Lisa, who no longer actually works at Touchstones, but is someone that works on the ground in Rochdale over a long period of time, and Brian, I guess it was like, there was a big question about how to bring a group together, and that was the crux of it for me. It was like, it felt nice that each of these connections came through people. Each of the group members came through existing connections. So like Alina came through a mate that teaches at Manchester University, and everything happened quite organically. And then it was like up to everybody if they wanted to stay for the ride, and also drop out at any point. Like, I think that's something that's worth mentioning, that like, yeah, there was no like expectation, I think, to, I don't know, for anything to become part of the artwork.
Well, it's interesting that you say that too, because it can really help to have that foundation that comes by being introduced through someone else, particularly when you're asking people to reveal and share things that could be really personal, and in some instances traumatic, which I know we'll get to a little bit later as well. But it's really good to help build that foundation. Can you talk us through maybe like the production, what it meant to bring everyone together in person, and maybe what the energy was like on the day? Was it quite improvised? Did everybody have ideas of how they wanted to, their placement, how they wanted to move in the space and interact with objects? And
I guess there was a loose structure, but Alina, I wonder if I can open it up to you as like the eyes of each of these films as well.
Can I just have the question again, please?
Yeah, no, I was just curious about how everyone, what the energy was like, I suppose, when you physically came together, and how you were responding to the different spaces. So when you were in the archive, when you were washing the statue, when you were in the open field, what was it like to be there, and like how long was the process?
Even though it was July, it was very cold. So a lot of it was just trying to make sure stuff gets done. But I think like the group dynamic has like been amazing from the jump. And I think when it came to shoot days, we all knew that we had an important role to get the stuff done, but we also placed a lot of importance on enjoying the process of doing it. And
did you know each other?
No, so we initially didn't know each other before this. We
like
just
a
met
family, there's like a kind of nice connection.
Oh yeah, and I know Bushra through like my great granddad was good friends with her dad, and like we're good family friends. But I hadn't connected with Bushra for like 20 years or whatever. She probably last met me when I was a baby.
Yeah.
So it was nice to like kind of rekindle that connection.
I was going to just jump in just to say that actually, basically, we didn't know each other, even though we're from the same town. We didn't know each other at all, and it was actually through the conversations, the space that we had on Zoom, that we kind of got to know each other and build a relationship and rapport with each other. We've all got our quirks, so yeah, so we didn't know each other at all. So I think when we interact now, it comes across like we do really know each other, but when we first met, we didn't know anybody at all, really.
And just meeting. Oh, sorry, Nazreen.
Sorry, yeah, just to add on to that, to your specific question, is it was very energetic. From my perspective, certainly, I was very new to the arts field. I was felt very honoured, to be honest, very privileged to be asked, and I want to say that because it's not something I would ordinarily engage in. And then the dynamics of what is art and what is all this and how it's going to come about, but how we got together, we certainly, I think, that energy is kind of synergize somehow, and in the most weird and wonderful, not only physical environment, but a psychological, I think, because we were going through a pandemic. And just seeing, you know, we were experiencing so many other things, and we had shared our hardships along the way. So I think our vulnerabilities allowed us to strengthen and develop some extraordinary relationships, I think.
Yeah, I was going to just say that's a credit to Jasleen, because she actually made it like a safe space for us, and we felt she was authentic, and it wasn't just about her work. So I think that, and we just had conversations first. I think first when I joined, I just thought I was going to have a couple of chats with Jasleen about our thoughts and ideas and what we were interested in, and that was it really. And then it just kind of developed, and we were doing it for quite a long time, and then Jasleen said she's thinking of making a film, do we want to take part? So that's how it came about. But initially it was just to see, I thought it was just a couple of conversations and stuff. I didn't really think I'd feature in the work or anything. It was more, I felt it was more like Jasleen carrying out research. I think that's what I thought.
It was a lot of conversation, right? Like and at no point does any of that kind of I don't think there was any feeling from my part anyway that we were like creating any new knowledge or creating any work for the artwork. Like, it was the conversations framed what came out. Yeah, the conversations were like a foundation for something that came out of that. And just to about your question about the films, like nothing was, there was structure, but it wasn't as you could see, like, it's just real time, basically, like everything's just happening in real time. And Alina and I didn't edit much away, actually. I didn't want it to feel like a stage. I didn't want anybody to feel like an actor. Like, the fatigue of reading the archive isn't edited out. The kind of and the
that kind of comes across. I guess I was just curious about something that Nasreen just touched on too, because you're filmed together, but you're coming together in a place that could potentially introduce trauma that maybe is reflected in your own life, whether through the stories that you encounter or through the absence of that representation. And I was curious about, the idea of trauma bonding, which is something that I spoke about a little bit with Lucy Shanahan and with Justine in another conversation ahead of this. And so what did it mean to actually come together in those spaces, especially with like your own personal experiences? You said that Jasleen created an environment of care, but you're still then strangers coming together. Was it hard to revisit these personal experiences and your family legacies? I don't want to take for granted that some of these things also might have been traumatic, but they could also just be very personal. So what was it like to visit the archive together? Anyone?
I was going to say,
why you unmute yourself, Rahela?
I was going to say, I think, I don't know, but when I was growing up, because I was doing arts and things when I was growing up, I always kind of felt like an outsider in many ways. And then obviously these feelings that we've had, I suppose we just kind of put them to the back of our minds, and then I suppose it was a safe space. So we felt safe enough to share, because we had to negotiate and navigate. We are all Asian women, but we've got different levels of faith. I think some of us are not Muslim, but most of us are, but we've got different levels of spirituality. So in that regard, but it was quite nice, because certain things, like in our histories, in our own personal archives, like like somebody else had this something similar, but it's not quite the same because obviously everyone is different. But it was kind of almost like not a relief, but yeah, somebody else shares something similar to what I'm going through. You know, I didn't know it was like that. That's how I felt anyway. I don't know, what do you think, Nasreen?
It's a tricky subject now. It's very personal. I found it quite traumatic just to somebody to allow us a moment to even ask us the question, you know, to even just to be asked the question is what are your thoughts on this? And then immediately what comes to your awareness at that point is whatever comes to mind, and you relive and you revisit what our parents shared with us, you know, what happened to us, it brought back unsavory memories. And are they memories? Are they our stories? Is it what we've heard? Is it what we've assumed? Is it what we've read? Again, it became all chaos. I lost order for a moment. And I find that to be very valuable experience psychologically. I felt it was very triggering. It's this silent suffering, but we've been accustomed to become survivors, to get up and carry on, not reflect, but to be given the safe space and the permission to question what is our archive and what is written. And that was, it wasn't easy. It was, gosh, wow, we're allowed to talk about these things. That was a very valuable experience.
Yeah, I imagine it's quite hard. Oh, sorry, Alina.
I was just gonna say, can I just add that, like throughout the whole process, it wasn't like a space where you ever felt pressure to share either. Like the stories that we told didn't always have to be, negative isn't the right word, but I guess relating to like negative things. So like the stories that I kind of chose to share were like more stuff that reminded me of my childhood, that were quite positive and quite things that made me happy. So I feel like there was space to like speak about your family histories and colonialism, etc. But there was also space to speak about and like rekindle with your community and the aspects that you're probably neglecting in your life as well.
I think what's really great about these environments and the relationships that can be forged is how much you can share verbally, but also how much is unspoken, and people will just see and understand or can empathize why you might have a certain mannerism, why your accent has a bit of a lilt in a way that's different, or you're attracted to the same kind of childhood snacks, if that's the case. It puts a lot of context when growing up, you might have felt like lost or isolated or just solitary in whatever your family experience was. Shifted a little bit. Oh, sorry, Bushra, did you want to?
No, yeah, just kind of like it was kind of nice to go back to the archives and read, you know, because I've heard about the stories, I've read about the stories in the past, but you kind of forget. But it was quite nice to go back and kind of read the archive. And again, for Alina was saying that she didn't really know about all this history and the stories that we've read, because she's the youngest, she's the baby of the gang. And it was quite interesting for her to have all this information, whereas I think like me and Nasreen knew quite a lot of the information because we were born and bred in Rochdale, whereas Rahela was from Oldham originally. So yeah, it was quite nice. And I think the fact that we all bonded so quickly and that we felt safe around each other, we could discuss openly about the archives and, you know, have our opinions. And yeah, that's good. Yeah.
I think I wouldn't say I didn't know about the stories. It was more, I was probably not interested in I wasn't interested beyond my own family, which is being real. I was not interested in this area because I was more, I don't know, I've probably grown up in a generation where we're trying to look past our environments.
I think there's something about like we've spoken as a group about how the like Touchstones Gallery, it's a space that like I certainly didn't go to those kinds of spaces growing up, definitely not in my family. And so like even though the archive is like public facing, depending on who's engaging with the archive is going to have a different conversation with it. And in a way, like that felt like I'll leave that bit out actually. I'm just thinking that I feel I'm always drawn to these like big, you know, the archive, right? I'm always drawn to it, and I'm always like, I came across this article recently that I was sharing with the group earlier by Suhaima Manzoor Khan, and it's about racism and cricket and Yorkshire. And there's this bit in it that like, I think the whole article, I felt like when I was reading it, it was describing this context of Rochdale, and that like, yes, we talk about ex-mill towns, and we talk about industrialization, and we talk about migration, but like maybe I could just share a little bit of it if that's okay.
Sure, yeah, definitely. And also I just want to encourage people who are here to maybe start submitting their questions. I think we have that Slido. So yeah, you can start submitting through there if you haven't already. Jasleen, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm just going to read a tiny bit of it. I'll put the link in the chat, but it says like, Yorkshire's textile mill. So it's talking about Yorkshire, and obviously we were working in Lancashire, but there's a parallel, right? Like wool and cotton. Yorkshire's textile mills and iron foundries were built during a period of rapid industrialisation in the 1800s by merchants whose money came from the slave trade, in which they exchanged goods pillaged from elsewhere for human beings at the West African coast. Profits made from enslaved labour were invested into new technologies such as locomotives, which were then exported to help pillage other colonies. Trains from Leeds went to Sierra Leone, or raw materials that were turned into cloth, which colonised countries were forced to buy. And the last two little bits, in 1832, Indian weavers petitioned Parliament to complain that British cloth imports, alongside exploitatively high taxation on Indian cloth exports, were undermining their industry, pushing many to leave their jobs and eventually to simply export raw cotton that Britain could spin and sell back to them. The industrialisation of places such as Yorkshire were built on the deindustrialisation of India. And then she goes on to talk about how those very conditions, deindustrialisation of somewhere and the industrialisation of somewhere else, is what brought her grandfather to Bradford to work in the mills, the very places that were contributing to the deindustrialisation of rural India, So I don't know, like I feel like these legacies are like, also like that first bit where Chakra speaking and eating the archive, like about the Home Office and visas and like the bureaucracy of citizenship, that is now, you know, that's not, there's something about looking at historic documents that like, it's quite easy to just think that it's a past, right? But these questions of citizenship are very much alive and kicking. And so what does it mean to like invite and collectively to study the archive together? And it's really, yeah, I feel like I'm constantly on this like learning journey where I'm trying to like piece together the things that I have and that are documented in the archive, and then all of the stuff that is not documented, and all of these, we talk, you know, all of these little anecdotes that we have that we've shared of, and some of which you hear in the work of like labour. Yeah,
I was going to just jump in because I think one of the questions you asked us during the online conversations was, do we see ourselves in the archives? And I think it was kind of like a unanimous no, because we felt, well, I felt that it was almost like somebody from outside of the community had come in and like was writing and talking about us, and that's not what happened. And when we were talking about our own personal histories and our archives, we knew it was very different. And I think we had a big issue about the fact that someone from outside the community was writing about us and it wasn't authentic or true, you know, like it wasn't, it's not, we hadn't spoken about it, our parents and grandparents hadn't spoken about it. Someone had come in who's not from the community and written about us. And I think that was really important, because that was kind of like where we started going, didn't we, about the archives, like if we felt like it represented us. That was me.
Yes, thanks for that. I mean, that's definitely, I mean, if you think about so I'm just noticing that we have questions coming in. So I have a couple more of my own, and then we'll take some of the audience ones. But I see your point definitely, Rahila, in terms of the archive really being, just thinking about the organizational structure. It's really like an imperial tool, and like the process of indexing, cataloging, and like classification, how they really exclude. And if you can't name things accurately, you won't see it, and then it doesn't exist. Something like that. But I'm kind of thinking on my feet there. So we've been talking about the archive, and I just wondered, going back to something that Jasleen was saying earlier, how did you start to see the archive, though, as a space for new creative possibilities? I mean, there are a lot of things that we've talked about here where you don't see yourself represented, and you've spoken about your hopes for the future of this project. How do you continue to use the archive as like an active material in how you approach your work? That makes sense.
Does anyone want to go first?
I was actually also thinking about how the body is kind of a living archive as well. And these stories that you're using, they're living documents.
I'd like to share a thought in terms of, particularly when you mentioned the body, because during this process and during these conversations, I think it was enlightening to hear what was coming out of my mouth, because it's not something which was pre-planned or pre-thought. It was a very organic conversations. And I actually felt, and I think I mentioned it, because I felt how my body reacted whilst hearing things. And it wasn't exactly what was said, it was what it was triggering inside of me. So, which made me realize, and I suppose it probably brings it to light again, that we are walking, talking archives in itself, but how do we capitalize that? How do we get a moment to reflect and actually value ourselves? How do we look within? And I think this provided and gave us, again, a safe space with permission. And I keep saying that because we're used to getting permission. We're used to asking for acceptance and, direction. We're used to that. We've been raised like that. This is how we institutionalize. And so all of a sudden to look back and think, oh, okay, that's making me question, am I allowed to? And this made me feel like, oh, I'm allowed to. And once that became slightly comfortable, we became closer, because our fears and our sufferings, our experiences were similar, and it kind of brought us together. Maybe our wounds had an opportunity to heal together in the same zone. I don't know. But it was a process, and a triggering one, if that. Sorry, I think I spoke too much then. Yeah.
I think it's jumping off what Rahila was saying, it's really rare that there's like, I think all you see in the archive is like this narrative or this image of like this racialized migrant image. It's like a trope, right? And so there is rarely any narrative around resilience or desires or like dreaming, or like, if you think about our elders coming as like Commonwealth citizens and this version of Britain that they'd been kind of like advertised to them, like what kind of dreams and desires they were thinking about. Sorry, I'm digressing, but I think it comes back to this thing about like wanting to meddle and like wanting to play with like what the archive can hold, or what even doesn't belong in the formal archive. One of the bits of work that we put in the exhibition together is a book that's printed on seed paper. It's kind of like a momentary catalogue, or like I've called it the Lexicon of Gut Feelings. So it's like this momentary counter archive, I guess. But the plan for it is that it will be read aloud and filmed by the community and planted at Deeplish Community Centre. So there's like this constant like, yeah, resistance to this archival logic, or like playing with like where these things belong, or how we want them to exist.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see that, and you've actually also answered some of the audience questions, which is great.
Okay.
I'm just gonna move to a question that we had here around the framework and direction. So Justine, how did you determine how you would work with Nazreen, Alina, Rahela, Bushra, and the others who weren't here? How much did you direct? How much did you let happen organically? And I wondered if you could maybe also comment about working with this group when you yourself aren't from Rochdale. So that kind of responsibility or distance that you might feel.
So the first question, I think I'm seeing different questions, but I'll try and keep it in my head. So the first question, I think I proposed some kind of, I think something that I do in my practice is that I cut and paste a lot. Like I take things that don't necessarily belong together and I put them together.
You're like puppeteering people?
No, not in that sense. Like I think as an object maker, like traditionally the things I make are like objects, and a lot of them are like, yeah, borrowing materials from different places and putting them together. So no, not in terms of the people being some of those objects, but I guess I was really open and transparent in proposing these things that we might do together in the town, and they were shaped from conversations that we had had. And then on the day, like, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, but like we didn't cut, and I wasn't directing, there was none of that. It was like it felt like ritual, it felt like an enactment of some sort, and we were witnessing it rather than trying to capture something perfect. Yeah. And did someone want to come in? No. Okay. And the second question was about being not from Rochdale. I just guess I'm like really aware of it and really sensitive to it. And there's a lot of like, I think it was something that I felt like I was doing consistently throughout this project, was like being transparent about the art world that I and others in the group are part of, and what it means for me to invite you to make this work together, and then how we might inscribe the work with politics rather than, how can we have agency? What do we say no to? How do we want to name ourselves and name this? So there was a lot of transparency, I think, and especially when you're working, when you're bleeding the lines between like life, normal life, and arts, and that very visible like artwork in a gallery context. So I think there's ethics and there's politics involved with me being an artist who's not from Rochdale. And there's work to do, like, that's outside of this commission, I think, like outside of this funding. There's conversations that we still have and want to have, and to see what comes next, and where maybe I'm less visible or we don't make work. I don't know, whatever that might be.
Just to your earlier point, there was some really beautiful choreography, and that maybe it sounds like it came about naturally. Someone was asking on that topic about the significance of the stepping machines in the field. There was just commenting also that was very beautiful, but also, yeah, just some of the other motifs. Can you say something about specifically the stepping machines?
Yeah, going nowhere, just walking nowhere. Yeah, I am really into, I'm really into like materials and aesthetics that come from like home or cash and carry life. That's my aesthetic like world. But yeah, I wanted to play with like what happens when you put certain things in certain places, and I wanted to create images that would make the audience think and have to read into the images in some way. And there's not one way to read it, but there's definitely some poetry and play in putting those things together.
There's a question here actually about the archive and accessing it. So they're wondering about the process of accessing the archive digitally, and then how did you make the decision about what to access together?
I think that's the thing that sadly, like, you know, this dream, and maybe we can make it happen, like there's no reason why we can't still do that, but this dream to like sit and study in a physical archive together didn't happen. So I had been there several times pre-COVID, and Shakra works in the archive, who's not with us today, and so everything was digitized for the project that we were looking at. And then it was like, yeah, bringing PDFs into sessions and looking at them together. So it was, yeah, quite boring actually, but luckily I had been able, and then Alina and we did go to the other archive, didn't we? And like,
yeah, we visited the archive where there's physical objects, but I wasn't interested, and neither was Justine. So we weren't interested in the physical objects, but then we found some exhibition catalogs. Is that what they're called? I think. Well, yeah. So it was like all the documents from like the exhibitions that were held in the gallery from the 80s, and that was really interesting. And yeah,
they've got, Rochdale has this, Touchstones has this incredible history of like, yeah, exhibitions by Black and brown artists, and that was the thing that captured our attention.
Yeah.
We have a question about the future of the project, and I wondered if you are in a position to let us know about the documentation or this project and how it might be, how it might enter the archive at Touchstones.
That's the hope. The hope is that the films are accessioned, and the kamizes that you see everyone wearing in the films hopefully will be accessioned as well, but we're still in the nuts and bolts, the logistics of that.
Yeah, that's a fun place to be. We talked a little bit about the commissioning bodies here, and I wondered, we spoke about how these commissioning bodies might benefit from a project like this. So do you want to say something about that now, since we're talking about entering collections and things?
I feel like I'm doing a lot of talking, but so please jump in, please. You know you can. Sorry, my head's catching up. What can organisations learn from this kind of work?
Jasleen, do you want me to?
Yes.
Take a moment. Take a breath, Jasleen. Take a moment. So let's share our personal experiences. It was a really interesting experience, how we bonded together and how we came together in the moment of our hardships, and also very organically let something very, very much develop. And I think for funders or commissioners or whatever label you'd like to place to whoever has the resources, to allow us the autonomy of doing things organically and from mistakes and trial and fun and humor and food. And you can capture something which you can't structure or manifest by conversation. So it's a very organic experience in itself. So my feedback to the funders would be to be valued, for somebody to come and ask the likes of us who are just everyday people is very honourable. It's very nice of them to value our time, give us a safe space to feel respected, heard, an opportunity to share our silent sufferings and allow for us to share that, and then to come together with a union together. But from an artist perspective, I don't know what it was like to work with somebody who's not, I'm not from the art world. It's not something that's ever, you know, our parents ever encouraged us to. I'd love to, but we never saw any Asians in it. And that's another thing I'd like to mention. I think somebody asked me the question is, what would have brought you into Touchstones Library if you was just not part of this project? And my answer was, well, I wouldn't have the time. I wouldn't think about it. It's not in my life or within my family. But what would attract my attention is the phrase Meri Jaan, which means my love. And it's on the poster because that resonates with me. That would have been my anchor in. So it's just a very lovely opportunity to learn and see where this takes us. I hope this takes us far. And maybe we get another opportunity to actually talk about the traumas it's triggered in a safe space, I think.
I wouldn't necessarily want that in a public conversation. I don't know.
No, yeah.
Just speaking.
I mean, that's an interesting concept because sometimes healing together is better, more understanding, and you can kind of offer solace to each other from a collective background, I think. So there may be something in there, but not a public platform.
Thinking about like, yeah, the learning that comes out of this, I think I think it's so complicated. I think we were talking earlier because we've all come out of another public programme thing this afternoon, so we're all a bit shattered and wired. But we were talking earlier.
It's like an hour and a half. This is easy.
We were talking earlier about like who benefits from this kind of work, and I don't have an easy answer for that because I think I find it all very complicated. But I think there are things that can make this work feel like how does agency stay and power stay with the group? And so I think long-term funding and real listening, like another book that I have open next to me talks about like how the listening sits uneasy with any form of institutionalization, whether it's party or not. Institutions tend to have rules or practices which define expectations and tune into certain voices and not others. Institutions are not very good at listening, even when they try to do it. So like, I think listening is a practice, and for it to, if you're listening to transform something and not for it to be a token kind of gesture, then I think something can come from that. So I think it's like putting people in positions where that something can change and asking what needs to be changed and doing the listening and then getting the money somehow to enact the listening, what the listening wants to change. I think it's, yeah, like we were chatting earlier about how maybe this group, maybe, I don't know, maybe like some straight up oral histories is something that is a desire in the group that I didn't feel like it was my place to do, but yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to jump in there.
Yeah,
one of the things which I really appreciated was the fact that you, Jasleen, gave us an opportunity, because we were saying all this stuff, why don't we see, artwork that represents us and things like that, small regional artists in the galleries, maybe people would go if they could identify with the artwork, if it's their culture, their heritage. And I do want to say like a big thanks, and you actually did brilliantly because you just sat back and you did actually just listen, but you let us speak to people from Up and Touchstones with our concerns and things. And I do think that conversation, and I think the people who came to that conversation, the online conversation, did actually take on board some of our concerns and what we wanted. And I think that dynamic did change. And I think that's part of the reason why, because after that, we did go into making the films and stuff, and we all kind of agreed to it. But it, like you said about the money and being valued and paid, not that we weren't before, but I think properly valued, you know, not just a token gesture. I think that was really important.
I think the key thing I'm taking away from this is that it needs to be embedded in a more sustainable way. So like structurally actually seeing visible change there, but also what you're saying with the archive, embedding these stories, making them, getting them accessioned, weaving them into, you know, the multiplicity of history. It's not just one linear story about Great Britain. We're gonna have to wind things down now. But I appreciate Jasleen trying to answer some of the questions that came through that we weren't able to get to. I'm sorry that we weren't, that we weren't able to answer all of your questions, but for those who aren't reading in the chat function, Jasleen did just answer that they chose to eat the rice paper because it was practical and could be ingested. But yeah, it was such a really great opportunity to meet you, Jasleen, and to speak with the people who really are the backbone of the work that you've created together. So thank you for that. And I think there were some really interesting points here about just thinking about histories and the importance really of the archive, but the archive being an active and open and accessible space for everyone. Otherwise, these stories, well, they're doomed to repeat themselves, and looking at these historic documents is very much part of our lives. And also the stories that aren't documented or accessioned in these things that live within us. That's a really key takeaway anyway that I'm thinking about. And also, I guess the process of unlearning some of these structures and where you can resist and really think creatively about challenges that we've experienced and how to move forward. Anyway, I'm going to turn it over back to Emma, but thank you everyone. And yeah, hopefully we see you again soon, and the link will be active and shared again. So for those who are unable to watch it through, that will be available to you. Thanks everyone. Emma?
Thanks, Louisa. So I just want to close the event really by saying thank you so much, Jasleen, Alina, Bushra, Nazreen, Rahila, Louisa, for such a generous and insightful conversation. And I really hope we have all learned so much from this project and the experience and our individual experiences of being part of it and institutionally as well. Thank you so much as well to the audience for participating and for your comments and questions that really informed this evening's discussion. I just wanted to mention, if you would like to hear more about Jasleen's project in Rochdale, you can listen to the Up podcast, which is hosted by Hetty Judah, who talks to Jasleen and many of the other collaborators. And I think there's a link posted in the chat. You can also find it on that project's website. And if you could take a moment just to share with us any further feedback that you might have, there should be a questionnaire in the Slido. If you wouldn't mind filling that in before you leave, that would be really helpful. We'll also be uploading the recording of today's event on Up Project's YouTube channel and website, which will include captions and BSL translation. And I just wanted to finally take a moment to thank our funders. The whole project was generously funded by Heritage Lottery Fund, Foyle Foundation, Garfield Weston, Rochdale Council and the Arts Council. And obviously we couldn't do any of this without their support. And last but by no means least, thank you to Jack Newbury, Up Project's project assistant, for providing technical support this evening. Thank you, everybody. Lovely to see you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Jasleen. Bye, everybody.
Bye.